It's great to be here. In front of our training center at the NTSB a few years ago on the window, it said, "From tragedy, we draw knowledge to improve the safety for us all." Pretty telling words. From tragedy, we draw knowledge to improve the safety for us all. December 29th, Jeju Air 737 crashes in South Korea. 179 people die. That's a tragedy. I would say, though, the tragedy exists already in the United States. We have 4 737s crashing on America's highways every week. Where's the outrage? Where's the commentary? I know we have some in the press here. We should talk about it more often. There is an opportunity to change the entire narrative of safety in the United States through autonomous vehicles. And we haven't done a great job of it because we often talk about only tragedy. But I know during this panel, it's great you're going to see each one of them. I think in the first one, you're actually going to hear from Aurora, I believe. I hope it's still correct. They had a tragedy in 2017. That was the Uber crash. But what they did is they actually exceeded the NTSB's investigations and recommendations, and they're actually exceeding safety now. We need to talk about those successes. I think in your second panel, you're going to hear from Waymo. They now have a dedicated team of 6 individuals that will do nothing but crisis response. They know something's going to happen, and they know the industry needs to be responsive. We can be positive about the message because we're having a tragedy on the highways every day. I think in the third panel, you're going to hear from local government officials, state government. And that's where I would say that the federal government has failed. The last time I was at CES was with Finch, actually, 2020. We were unveiling AV 3.0, 4.0, sorry, 4.0. About a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, the current administration announces another 4-year plan. The state governments have taken over where the federal governments have failed. But I will say in the next 4 years, I think there's an opportunity for not only autonomous vehicle legislation, but further implementation to save more lives. Finch and I were talking before we started, you're going to have a whole new education effort with the new administration, whoever they may be. Don't just take it for granted that they know the issue, they understand it. Make sure you're educating, talking to them, validating, finding out who will be your champions. Once you have those, make sure you take that message and find third-party validators. We can be one of those. It's amazing. We don't have regulatory authority, but we have amazing bully pulpit. We have the press, we have the media, we have the ability during tragedies to be able to mitigate the message to say that this is important. So I hope you'll take the time today to not only learn from that, but to be optimistic about the next 4 years. Unfortunately, usually whenever we're out in the press and the media, it is one of those tragedies. The last time I launched was in Vicksburg, Mississippi, with 7 fatalities in a highway accident. The irony of it is, it takes more than 6 or 7 people to die in one accident for a board member to go. But the next autonomous vehicle crash that has a fatality, you'll probably see one of us there. So I'm hopeful that you'll reach out in advance, build some goodwill. I call it dig your well before you're thirsty. It's much easier to come up and meet one of us and say, "It's good to see you again. I hate it's under these circumstances," than it is, "Okay, who are you and why did you just kill someone?" Those are opportunities over the next 4 years for not only autonomous vehicles, but safety advocates, people that are looking for additional mobility, disabilities. You have an entire ecosystem. You just need to be able to literally weaponize it in your advantage. And I think, personally, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill will be your next great opportunity to have a good chance. You've got some great people working in the House and the Senate that understand this. You've got advocates like Finch out there in the private industry. You've got us. We are pulling for you. So I hope you're successful. I would hate for us to continue to learn from prior tragedies, but we're going to need to. And as we do, we'll get better, and hopefully more people will get home alive. So we're looking forward to the discussion, and thanks for having me.
Hello? Oh, there we go. All right, Pete, it's time for you and your panelists to come up, please. I'm going to let you introduce them and let them introduce themselves, but thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much.
If you have a mic there, make sure.
Good morning, everybody.
It's a switch.
All right, take two. There we go. All right. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Pete Bigelow from Automotive News.
Are you guys getting blinded?
We are getting blinded.
Let's turn it off. I don't want them to get blinded. Sorry. There you go.
Shadow show.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. I'm Pete Bigelow from Automotive News. I write about automated driving, autonomous vehicle technology, and I host the Shift Mobility podcast. I'll ask each of you to maybe quickly introduce yourselves, and then we'll get rolling here.
Sterling Anderson, co-founder, chief product officer of Aurora.
Raquel Hurtasun, founder and CEO of Wabi.
Shai Shalev Schwartz, CTO of Mobileye.
All right, thanks so much. I think, to echo Todd, autonomous vehicles have an incredible opportunity to dramatically reduce traffic deaths and improve safety on the roads around the world, not just American roads. At CES and events like this, we have seen over many years now the hype cycle play out. Autonomous vehicles were coming around the corner back in 2015, 2016. We hit a lull. But this year, I kind of sense some cautious optimism returning. So I'd be curious, just to kick this discussion off, and Raquel, maybe I'll start with you. What's the state of technology and business out there today?
Yeah, so I would say that, I will go also a little bit broader than maybe autonomous vehicles, which is physical AI, and this is what you're hearing everywhere, right? Is that revolution of transforming the physical world is happening now. And, we are very, very optimistic of what, this next generation technology is able to do, how you can actually now build technology that can scale, and you can launch, driverless product like Wabi in 2025. So it's around the corner for sure, and I can't wait to to show you guys, what this is.
Shai, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the optimism is because we see a partial solution that are very, very promising. So the technology is definitely there. And now the question how to revolutionize transportation. And we believe that we still didn't make the revolution, but it's going to happen in the coming 2-3 years. Why we didn't still see the revolution? Because if you look at two maybe most promising products, one of them is L2 Plus or eyes-on systems, where these are really cool systems, but at the end of the day, the driver needs to be alerted and look at the road, so it doesn't change fundamentally how we think about transportation. It's more comfort, it's a real fun, but it's still driving. On the other spectrum, we have robotaxis around the corner, but at the moment, robotaxis, because they are limited geographically and also because the price of the ride is not much cheaper than the alternative, like taking an Uber. So people are not changing their behavior due to the existence of robotaxis. What is going to change in the coming 2-3 years is that on one hand, we're going to see eyes-off system for consumer vehicles, and then people really will think differently about commute because you can, sit in your car but not be busy with driving but doing something else. So you buy back your time. Then commute becomes something else. And on the other end of the spectrum for robotaxis, once the price will drop to much cheaper than the alternative taxis, then again people will rethink about, do I want to own a car at all? Maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe I don't want to take my car and I want to take an alternative, a train combined with a robotaxi. So this is going to revolutionize transportation, and we are almost there, and I'm optimistic that it's going to happen in the coming 2-3 years.
And perhaps by the end of the first quarter, Aurora will have trucks deployed on public roads in Texas. Sterling, what's the state of the self-driving truck industry and how?
Yeah, target's April, so technically second quarter, but we'll get there. The other thing that I'd mention, I think the breakdown that distinguishes between driver assistance and autonomy. Many of the challenges of autonomy in robotaxi are not evident in autonomy for trucks. And just to give a quick example of a couple of things that I'm talking about there, you mentioned the behavioral change, which is a big thing for human drivers accustomed to leaving our stuff in our own car. In trucking companies are already accustomed to fleet-based ownership and management of assets. Trucking companies are already accustomed to the operation of trucks in a world where a driver can be a robot and a driver can be a human, and either way you're dispatching and interacting in very similar ways. But the other thing is, in trucking, you don't require anywhere near as low a cost as you do in robotaxi, because the unit economics are overwhelmed by the value proposition that exceeds hours of service limitations and effectively delivers the value of what was the equivalent of $80 per hour of a team of human drivers allowed that would be required to drive a truck effectively through the day and night, with a robot that doesn't get tired, doesn't get distracted, doesn't get hungry, doesn't have to use the restroom, and can just drive. And so the value proposition for trucking companies is enormous, and that's why we're starting there. And to your question, April is our target for our commercial launch without any human in the truck. We've got about 36 trucks operating commercially today in Texas, but they're each in a final data validation mode, and so they've got humans on board supervising.
All right, Raquel, you kind of hinted at this before, but it's bigger than autonomous driving. That's one particular subset of the AI revolution that we're seeing, and I think that is a revolution. You correct me if I'm wrong, but how do the rapid AI advances that we're seeing play into autonomous driving and really kind of upend the way that AVs have been developed over many years now?
Yeah, and there is a reason why I founded the company 3 years ago, and I didn't found the company before that, which is that I was waiting for the right time where technology was at a point that AI could actually bring us to the next level. The analogy really is using the ChatGPT moment in November of 2022, right? Applies really nicely to autonomous driving transportation, which is. There were a lot of hand-engineered systems where there was AI on it, but suddenly a system trained to just predict words was able to do so much better than anything that anybody actually imagined, right? And that breakthrough of unleashing the full power of AI was what brings us to where we are today, where the way that you interact with computers is really changing dramatically for each one of you, our productivity, etc. So think of the same thing coming to now the physical world, right? So it's not that you can take an LLM and say, okay, now go and drive. That's a very, very naive approach, right? So you need to develop technology where you can, to your point before, you can actually verify, you can prove safety. Technology that is very efficient. I brought a piece recently about sustainable AI, which is something very important as well. Technology that can really generalize to any situation of the road because you cannot predict or observe all those different things. So that's what we are doing is next generation of world models, foundation models, and simulation so that you can actually do this. And this technology, there is nothing really that much specific about the driving use case. What I like about, in particular tracking is what Sterling was talking about, that the unit economics are really, really good, right? And if you are super capital efficient like us, that you can actually build a product with, simply $200, $300 million, you are already, launcher driverless. You are in an amazing position to really build a product that is cheap, can really generalize, expand geographies quickly, and capture that market where there is very, very few players. There's a lot of consolidation. So expect, tracking first. I think that's where we see the scale. But there is so much more from robotaxis to humanoids, to warehouse robotics, to you name it. The physical world is about to really get transformed, and the next 3 to 5 years are going to be unbelievable. As we were talking about, as AI scientists, we used to work at the same place 15 years ago, and we never imagined that we will be on a place like today, and this is just the beginning. There is so much more coming, right? And that's what we, I will speak for both. We really look forward to see what the next generation AI is going to do.
I'm curious, the three of you are the AI experts in the room, and to your point, you've worked together on this project or particular technology for a long time. How do you talk about AI to people who don't have that background, be it the stakeholders who are in the room here, or I think of my kids or my mom or people who need to ultimately know how this works to feel safe in a vehicle. But how do you go about that conversation, Shai?
So since AI systems are intended to do tasks that people are doing, humans are doing, so let's talk about human intelligence. So there are several levels of human intelligence, starting from processing sensory data. So we use our eyes, our ears, we look at the environment, we hear sounds in the environment, and we need the sensory intelligence, the ability to parse and process and build a cognitive map out of what we see. So this is the first component of intelligence, of human intelligence. Then the second component is memory. So if we think about a simple task like drive from home to work, okay, so we need to process the environment, but we also need memory to know what is away from home to work, or how did I arrive to this room and I have no idea how to go back, okay? So we need memory for that. This is the second element of intelligence. Then comes the decision-making part. So once you have memory and you also have processed the environment around you, you need to start making a decision. In the context of driving, you need to decide whether you want to yield to this pedestrian or not, and whether you want to accelerate more or less. So this is a decision-making process, which is a third element of intelligence. So far, it's intelligence that exists also in animals. The fourth component is language. And verbally expressing and communication between people is a huge element of intelligence. And if we go back to Turing in 1950, that asked the question, can machine think? Then his answer was, if you can cheat and look like a human, if you are a machine that can look like a human across a conversation, it means that you are intelligent. So it means that you can verbally express your ideas and talk with another person. So communication and verbal words are the next next component of intelligence. But now comes a really more advanced part. The fifth part is learning, okay? It's not enough to have memory and to understand the environment. These are all very, very important skills. But in order to truly be intelligent, you need to be able to learn new things, to learn new tricks. So you need to be able to take examples of some phenomenon and make sense out of it, and change your future behavior based on something that you learned from data. So learning is the fifth element, and the last one, maybe it's the most critical one, is reasoning. Reasoning is going beyond what you saw, is not only parsing examples that you already saw and figuring out something out of them. It's a mental process where you do step by step reasoning and gets outside of the knowledge of what you saw. So these are the elements of intelligence.
All right, thank you. Sterling, I'm curious, thinking about communicating important aspects of how AI works. One of the interesting developments in the industry right now is end-to-end systems. Well, so can you explain what that is, and does that unlock unlimited, rapid advances in autonomous driving?
Good question. I think the different people mean different things by this, but what I'll say, some of the more naive implementations look an awful lot like send sensor returns into a very large learned model and get control out, and assume that all of the elements of intelligence that were just described are somehow manifesting within the bowels of that model. You don't know that they are. All you know is what you put into the system and what comes out of it. This is what I'd refer to as a kind of end-to-end monolith, a black box type approach. Can be very difficult to introspect. And by that I mean understand why it's making the decisions that it's making. Now there are some techniques that you can use to output certain elements of its decision making so you understand it, but it's even more difficult to specifically train or to control or have any kind of control over the output not surpassing certain bounds. You and I have all agreed to be governed by a set of rules of the roadway. This is as important for our own safety as it is for the motoring public. In doing so, in deploying a system like this, we believe it's imperative to be able to ascertain, to verify, to validate that system, and be able to tell regulators and the public who shares the road with them, this system was specifically designed so it will not break certain rules of the road. And so what we developed, we've coined verifiable AI, which is effectively a compound AI system that leverages a set of what you can think of as control rods. They're constraints that are placed interstitially throughout the system to ensure that the output of any one module, be that perception, be that motion planning, or be that controls, or otherwise, is never hallucinated. I expect that most of you, if you've played a lot with LLMs, you may have at some point seen comedic hallucinations, right? How do I make my pizza more tacky? I don't know, put glue in it, right? Like these are funny things that we look at that and we're like, okay, didn't pass the Turing test on that. Human never would have told me that. Hilarious when you're interacting with a chatbot. Not so hilarious when an 80,000-pound truck goes careening off the road because it decided that putting glue in something was better than some other form of making a pizza tacky. So that's really important to us, and it's something that we have been designing for many years, incorporating the best of AI throughout the system in ways that will cause it to manifest emergent human behavior learned from what it observes on the road, things that we could never encode via rules. It would just be something of a combinatorial fool's errand, but that are governed by or controlled with a set of interstitials or invariants that ensure that it doesn't do something unsafe, dangerous, or in violation of the rules of the road that other actors around it are expecting it to follow.
Raquel, I think there's different ways to skin this cat. So how does Waabi approach developing its AI?
Yeah. So I guess we are in the polar opposite of this spectrum. But maybe I have a question for you, Sterling, before I give you my view, which is, are you saying, since you mentioned perception, that you can guarantee no false positives, and therefore you never have hallucinations?
No, that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that when we have a false positive, we know it specifically because that is an introspectable module whose output is concrete. And we can specifically target that module, not the entirety of the system. So for instance, if we see that our car is driving through an intersection and it just drove into a black car, well, maybe it was because it misread the traffic light. Maybe it was because it misunderstood the rules of right-of-way. Maybe it was because that was a black car and so many of the videos it's been trained with, it's been driving over shadows that look a hell of a lot like black cars. So it does allow us specific training of specific elements of the system so that we both, once we understand that we've got false positives, we can train the system to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're referring to interpretability, not necessarily that you guarantee that you verify the system, right? Yeah, which are two different things. Yeah, so I guess continuing that line of thought is that, Waabi is going with, an end-to-end approach, right? And what that means is that the entire system can be trained automatically from data. And that gives you an incredible ability to learn very complex decision-making processes. At the same time, the system is such that it actually creates interpretations of the environment. And so you end up with something that you can actually, I'm going to use your term, verify. Right? So you don't give up on the verification, but you actually are able to use the full power of AI to learn much more complex functions. And that's what, and it's able to do reasoning, which is very, very important, so that at every point in time, the system can understand the implications of every decision it is going to make, and the implications of not taking any other decision it could have made. And if you guys were at Jensen keynote, for example, he talked about the scaling laws and reasoning being kind of the next opening of the next scaling law. So that's the type of system that we are building, that we have built from day one at Waabi, and that enables us to be very efficient on the data. So we don't brute force on give me the entire internet so I can learn about the concept of an object, right? So that's what we believe, and you end up with the best of both worlds, right? You end up with interpretability, you end up with the end-to-end, and this aha moment of generative AI, and at the same time, you get all the goodies.
I love this conversation. If I can go back to Raquel, when you just asked Sterling, like, can you guarantee there's no false positives? And you said no, and it sets a very legitimate expectation. Going back to what Todd talked about. How do you message safety? How do you have discussions with stakeholders about the realistic expectations for safe autonomous driving when perfection is not the standard, but having a mature conversation about what AI is capable of and what it's not,
Yeah.
is a very good starting point, I think.
Yeah. Look, an end-to-end solution requires probabilistic verification. What I mean by that is it requires a lot of data that's pumped through the system in a number of situations where you have to just say, look, odds are we won't do something stupid, but we don't know. We can't control, we can't guarantee that. While a compound AI system cannot guarantee that it will never have a false positive. What it can guarantee is I will never crank the wheel into the car beside me. You can't say that for an end-to-end system. What it can guarantee is I will stop for red lights. You can't say that for an end-to-end system. And I could go on, but what I'll say is when talking with regulators, when talking with the motoring public, the ability to tell them, look them straight in the eye and say, my truck will not do these things, is powerful. And it's important for each one of us whose families and loved ones share the roadways with these, that we're able to get that kind of certainty from those who would deploy them.
I'm going to broaden this out a little bit, thinking about how AI is developing and how people are using it in different ways. If we're sitting here at this breakfast again, CES 2026 is probably around the corner. I feel like I was just here 2 weeks ago for the last one. What advances do you expect here in the very short term on the artificial intelligence front that will be 6 months old the next time that we get together here next year? Shai?
I think, so first let me just say that regarding the previous discussion, I have my own opinions, but I think that it's important to figure out that there is no single way to reach the target. So I believe that there may be more than one correct answers. What is important is to be transparent with the public about what exactly we mean by safety. And at least for Mobileye, we published a paper 2017 about decision making, about no lapse of judgment. Exactly what do we mean by that? And this year we published another paper trying to give a more comprehensive view on what is a reasonable risk and what is an unreasonable risk. So just as one example, do we need to take into account what happens if both the front tires of an autonomous car get flat at exactly the same moment? Okay, you can answer yes or no, but you need to be transparent about your answer. So this is just one thing. Regarding your question, I think that what's happening now is a reasoning revolution. And in a year from now, we will talk more and more about reasoning. Reasoning is something that is not a one-dimensional thing. There are many types of reasoning. There is what we call intuitive reasoning. Intuitive reasoning means doing a cognitive step-by-step thinking process where you have one claim leading to another claim, leading to another claim, and then at the end you have some conclusion or some new knowledge. But it is limited because if you make just one mistake in your reasoning process, then the entire tower collapses, the entire claim collapses. So humanity went to different types of reasoning. And the next one is maybe Greek philosophers came out with the idea of logic reasoning. Logical reasoning, meaning that every step follows from the previous step exactly, precisely, mathematically. This is a great idea that leads to revolutions in humanity, but is also very limited because not on all things you can talk with black and white. I think that the next revolution is scientific reasoning. Scientific reasoning is a sweet spot. On one hand, you can talk about guarantees that each step follows from previous step. On the other hand, you can talk much broadly about ideas, and I think this is something that took humanity many, many steps ahead, and we are going to see this with AI.
Raquel?
Yeah, so for me, and I think it's, we have an opportunity to really build the next generation of safety and how AI can actually help into that. And I will say, maybe I will answer you one more thing, and then I will go into what I was going. But I think it's important to understand that satisfying rules of traffic doesn't mean that you're not gonna not have accidents or you're not gonna have fatalities, etc. For example, this happens with our trucks. This is a real example where we were blinded by a big truck in front of us and somebody was stopping lane. We had to really go outside to the shoulder in an area where you shouldn't to avoid, running into a car and then, potentially being a fatality, right? So that's the complex decision making that we need to make, and the AI needs to make that decision, or your entire system. So it's not as simple as I will always stop at a red light and therefore I'm safe. That's not the.
It's a good place to start, though.
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that.
Yeah. We love teasing each other, so that's good. Where I was going is that, this is also the time of the revolution of neural simulators. And why is this important is that in the era of AI, compute is important, but data is as important, right? And in the case of safety, we need to be able to say that our system is safe and expose it to, a lot of the things that might happen on the road. And if you look at the rate of accidents on highways, as we develop self-driving trucks, those are very, very low. And the question is, what is the size of the fleet that you need to actually have statistically significant numbers to show that your system is safer than a human? If you made the math, it's impossible for any of us to be able to do that. So you need a different tool. Right? And that's where if you actually have a simulator that can really mimic the real world, can really test the entire system, can have coverage across all these scenarios, that you can prove that, and you can prove the realism, which is very important. And you should be asking, is if you safety case, you use simulation, what's your realism score? If they cannot answer that, dismiss all that simulation system. And I think that this is a great opportunity where now we are at a level that is so realistic that we can use this as a tool, as your driving test, to really ensure that all the systems that each one of us want to put on the road is indeed safe. And I think that's very, very exciting to really enhance safety to the next level because, self-driving systems is much more complicated than aviation. There is a lot of humans and things that happen on the road, the level of complexity. So we need to adhere to the standards that are, have been built, but we need to go beyond. And that's where I think is a very, very exciting moment.
At the first paved breakfast 6 years ago, I'm guessing the question, how safe is safe enough, was asked because that's been the common theme for a long time. Sterling, how's the answer to that question matured and evolved over time?
Not answering with the NTSB in the room. And we're done.
Fair enough.
I'm joking. No, I mean that I find that one notch above the trolley problem question. I call them cotton candy questions, right? They're intellectually stimulating, substantively vacuous, right? Like I don't think they're substantively quite what folks would make them out to be. Our whole goal is to improve the safety of the roadway, right? We all know what average human statistics look like on the roadway. Yeah, we all recognize that robots may be viewed with greater skepticism than a human driver, if and when they make a mistake. We also appreciate that there will be a hell of a lot more data coming off these cars and trucks with which to recreate the situation and understand exactly what happened. I think NTSB is going to love this. And so I expect that, but coming back to their question, I think one of the other things that I would call out, and this harks to Raquel's original point, 2025 and beyond really is a time where AI, as we currently call it, which is a notoriously kind of vague term, typically means the thing that computers can't do yet. But it really is a moment for embodied AI systems. And the things that all three of these panelists are working on are some of the most extraordinary, most tactical, most beneficial to humanity of the entirety of embodied AI. Yes, factory robotics will be a thing. Yes, there will be a number of other applications of some of these systems. But this is the single most important area that we can be making a difference for all of us and for humanity collectively right now. And I'm really excited about that.
Maybe along those lines, as our time starts to run down, I want to make sure each one of you have a few minutes to discuss. Give us a lay of the land. Like, where are you at here in 2025? What are you putting on the road? How does your business and technology evolve here in the very short term. Shai, we'll start with you.
So what we already have in the road in production is supervision system, which means a system where the car can drive itself almost everywhere, but the driver still needs eyes on the road. It's already in production in China, now coming to Europe. What we see ahead of us in winning production programs with the VW Group, coming a robotaxi to the road 2026, and an eyes-off consumer car 2027 with Audi. So the robotaxi with ADMT, the VW Group, and 2027 eyes-off with Audi. I think that this is very, very exciting because this is a point of revolution. This is a point where products become to transform the way we think about commute.
All right, Raquel?
Yeah, so I will argue from my bias perspective that 2025 is the trucking year, and it's make it or break it, right? I think, from Waabi's perspective, where we are today is you can see our trucks driving autonomously with a safety driver, public roads in Texas, and by the end of the year, you will be able to see them without a human on board, right? So that's huge milestone not yet accomplished, and I'm not talking about a demo. I'm talking really about, something that you can commercialize, scale, etc. So very, very exciting year ahead of us, and we've been in extremely speedy, development while being super, super safe by doing almost everything on simulation. So not compromising safety, but enhancing safety, if any. And you're gonna hear and see a lot of very exciting things from us. So I will tease that up, but I will not say what it is.
And Sterling, first quarter or second quarter, I'll get my month straight
April.
here eventually.
We'll just say
April. Give us some details on Aurora's plans.
2025, obviously a big year. We'll complete the validation for our Dallas to Houston launch lane. We'll be scaling up through the year. And one of the things that we've been working on for several years, and you saw some evidence of them 2 days ago at Jensen's keynote, is we've been putting in a foundation for large-scale, long-term application across OEMs, across Tier 1 suppliers, and across the industry. And so for us, autonomy for a long time, as we watched the hype cycle play out, that you described earlier, we saw at its peak and at its most frothy, an awful lot of demonstrations, an awful lot of people, looking for the thing that could differentiate their story so as to raise money, so as to put out a demo. We don't believe demos are the way that you make a difference. We believe the way you make a difference is building what is often silent, quiet, behind-the-scenes foundational work. I just came off the stage with Volvo Group's CEO, Martin Lundstedt. I met Martin and Lars Stenquist 7 years ago. We've been talking about trucks and building trucks together for a very long time. We've been putting in place the foundation for large-scale online manufacturing of these trucks and sale directly to customers, which is huge. If you're a customer, you're not going to buy from a pipsqueak company like Aurora. You're going to buy from an OEM who stands behind their product and has for 100 years. And so putting in place partnerships with NVIDIA, putting in place partnerships with Continental, who will ultimately produce our self-driving kit, our computer and our sensors at very large scale and very low cost that ultimately make it not only unit economic positive contribution margin for a truck, but allow it to work in a robotaxi type application. And so for us, a lot of what we do at Aurora, you won't see. And we won't talk about, and we won't put out demonstrations. You may occasionally hear an announcement. You may occasionally hear someone like Jensen get on stage and say, hey, this is what we're working on. You may hear Martin get up and talk about, hey, we've got the truck done. But 2 of the top 3 heavy truck manufacturers today are partnered with us. That's 50% of the U.S. trucking market is aligned with Aurora System. And so once we launch in April, our expectation is we continue to grow that slowly and gradually. We'll expand across a couple of additional lanes. We'll get to longer lanes that exceed hours of service limitations for humans. But we'll keep at a lot of the plotting behind the scenes work that we've been doing for 8 years in preparation for what we expect ultimately will be a very large scale opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you to the three of you so much for sharing your expertise and vantage points and plans. How about a hand for the panel?